principles that we work to. And the first one is replacing the object with a record. Now, anybody who's got a background in archaeology will know that this is similar to excavation, where we dig the site away, you can't put it. Most things don't make their way to a museum collection, so our record has to replace the object. The second thing is we have to assume that the reader is a dreadful old cynic who spends all their time trying to work out why we're wrong. They won't believe us that we have identified it correctly unless we give them enough evidence. So it's kind of showing our working, if you like, enough evidence to back up what you're saying. Thirdly, of course, we have to be able to search the database, and as we've seen, that's mainly done through the description. And lastly, the database is the public face of the Portable Antiquities Scheme. We've got no other real tangible product other than our data. So this relationship between text and images, the illustrators often say, oh, we've got an image, why do I need all this text as well? Well, we've seen you can't search images, not exactly. You can't give the computer a shape and say, find me everything of this shape. That second one, the wrong image may be attached, or the image may become detached and lost. I've spent weeks of my life reattaching two vast sets of images that got separated. But the most important one is the last one, and this is where people who can't draw have to write descriptions. They have no alternative. It's because, like drawing, you have to look incredibly closely and analytically at an object to do a good description, and that feeds back into your identification and feeds back into your analysis of the object. So it's really good for you, as well as everything else. First being important, it's good for you. Right, the next thing to think about is who we're making the record for, who's reading the record. Of course, there's lots of possible users, with lots of different needs. Planners, all they may need to know is that there were some Roman finds found in one end of the field. Find specialists are right at the other end. They want to know every single thing about an object that they can. And most people are somewhere in between. The trouble is, we've got to make a record that satisfies everybody as much as we can. And so that needs to be uppermost in your mind. And most of that's done through writing the description. So, we need to make our descriptions easy to read and understand for everybody. We also need to make them easy to search for and to find. And the trouble is that those are often in direct opposition to each other. It's really easy to understand a record that uses simple language. I know that's a pretty awful sentence, but all this here, it's pretty simple words. You know, everybody knows what a top and a bottom is, although we'll come on to that later. Internally and externally, three edges, triangular, exterior, that kind of thing. Lyre-shaped buckle, that is terrible jargon. For instance, it doesn't have any strings, so it can't really be lyre-shaped. Right, so let's take findable first of all. So what helps us make our records findable? Now that's the wrong way around, because this slide says these are the things not to do, because I'll make them unfindable. So a spelling and a typing mistake, like farting, go straight over to try and find all the fartings, or the wrong object term being used, or the wrong classification, or this is a real bugbear, several terms used for the same concept. A pierced coin should be pierced. I just wish there weren't so many names for holes through things. Right, the next thing is making a record intelligible. Now once you've found the record you want, can you get the information you need out of it? Because obviously our descriptions have got to be intelligible as well as findable. And I'm going to take these points in order. Starting with the first one. Information scattered about the record in a random order. That is really hard to understand, and it's much better to do things in a logical way, because it's just easier to follow. Now, it doesn't really matter what the logical way is. One of the things you can do is start from the outside and work to the inside, or the other way around. Now, I find something like this, it's easiest to start at the outside and work your way in, doing each zone of decoration. What you might start off by saying is that it's circular, and then it's divided into concentric zones. And you take the first one, the outside, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next, and eventually you're in the middle. This one, I really hate doing these, they're so difficult to describe. But at least that thing in the middle, which is a cross, least you can say that there's a four-petaled flower in the middle, decorated with a narrowed diagonal cross. At least you, and when you've got that down, at least you've said something and you can build on it. Whereas if you tried to start with the outside, it would be horrendous. So inside and outside are good things to places to start. Then for that, you might want to start at the top and go down to the bottom. Now, the thing about inside and outside, the centre and the edges are always the same. You can't get those mixed up. You can get the top and the bottom mixed up if you're holding it the other way up. So you've got to make sure that your reader knows which way you're holding the object. Yeah. So it's good to orientate them right at the beginning by saying something like, at the top, brackets, the wider end, or the attachment end, or something like that, so that you've told them which way you're holding it up. Now, if you work through the object in a logical way, it also helps you avoid leaving things out by mistake. If you spend a while staring at it thinking, oh, I can see that, oh, I can see that, oh, I can see this, oh, I can see the other, you might leave something out. But if you do it logically, you won't. But when you get to the end of a description, do always check it through to see that you haven't forgotten to mention something. My example for this is this one, which incidentally is very similar as an object type to that. I think that one's best described from the rivets down. I think that one's best described while holding it a different way up. Because when the rivets are held, the rivet holes are held to the left, the animal is the right way up. So don't always assume that the same object type will always be held the same way up. It usually will be, but not always. Now, the most obvious thing here is this animal. I think that most people might start with the animal, and then they get to the end of the animal, and they stop. And they might forget to say that the animal is in a field which is shaped around the rivet holes, or that there's an undecorated border that goes all the way around the outside, or in fact that the whole thing is shaped like that. If you start with the most obvious thing, you may, and don't check that you've done everything, you may miss things out by mistake. Right, back to the list, and the next one is ambiguity. Now, one of the great things about reading other people's descriptions is that you might find that someone's used a word that you also use, but in a completely different way to the way that you use it. So probably that will mean that you shouldn't be using such an ambiguous word. Try to find another word and really make sure that you won't be misunderstood. Now, my example for this is these. These were all originally described on the database as round. All of these pinheads were round pinheads, but they're all of completely different shapes. So we need to be more specific. So you might say flat, circular and set on edge for this one. This one might be globular, or if it's very, very perfect and regular, it might be spherical. This one's almost biconvex. It's circular when seen from above. I really don't like things that are describing a shape in terms of another shape. Bun shape is the one that really annoys me the most. People know what bun looks like. Anyway, all these things have been described as bun shaped on the PAS database, and as you can see, they are many different shapes. I think bun shaped was used by one archaeologist in something like 1925 to refer to a loom weight, and it's just been used again and again and again and again. Also be careful with how you describe the different sides of the object. Do you all know about projections and how you put the different views on? Well, David Williams, the much missed David Williams, once a member of you said that, looking at something like this, he said, well, you simply put the picture of the left on the left, and the picture of the right on the right, and the picture of the top on the top, and the picture of the bottom on the bottom. How hard can it be? And when you put it like that, it's really easy. But so this has got all of its faces, all of its views on the same image. And so this helps us see what words we use for the different parts of it. So the top and the base or the bottom will be underneath. I don't think it particularly matters too much about those words, but I don't really like the use of the word back for the reverse. The reason why is I think it can be misunderstood. There aren't an awful lot of things like this, but they do exist. This thing has two backs, beast with two backs. No, it has to be the beast with one back and reverse. Section is a word that I feel also has, well, I have written down two meanings, but I've clearly think it's three. Most people use section to mean part of, don't they? Yeah. Or it can mean a notional cut through, like a cross section, or in archaeology it can mean a vertical cut through stratigraphy. Now, this is confusing, and it's particularly confusing when you use it in more than one way in a single record. Now, I made this up. I have to admit I made this up. I don't think anybody would ever write this. But it is true for that object. And what you need to do is you need to replace those words with other ones. Find another word. I'm not saying never use section, because sometimes you want to make it an adjective, so you put a hyphen in here and it would be a circular section object. That works, whereas just having the word section doesn't tend to work. Another word that's tricky is side. So you might want to say that this object has got a strip of little transverse grooves down each side, and then the person who's reading this, I think what's happened here is that someone's tried to describe what's going on, and they thought, okay, small indentations, small triangular indentations. Oh, they're on both edges. There's small triangular indentations on both edges. And we've got two rows. So two rows of small triangular indentations run along both longitudinal edges. Sadly, two rows along both edges means four rows, doesn't it? Yeah. So you've got to go back and look and check that what you've written makes sense. I changed that to that. Probably gone. Anyway, we're moving on to the last two, and I'm going to take those together because I think they're linked. Because if you try to write too briefly, you always end up with jargon. I've got a couple of examples. I think perhaps are being a bit unfair in some of them. Well, I'm not being unfair with the top one. I mean, why bother to write that when you could just have written how many millimetres it was? You know, you've got to measure it anyway. No one knows what that means. It's fourth brass, which is a 19th century way of saying small point. Yeah, something like that. Yes, I think that's an example of somebody who really knows their stuff, right? Not showing they're working. Yeah. This one, because I know who wrote that. This one, I also know who wrote this, and this is very unfair because this would have been 1999. You know, we hadn't worked out what we were doing, and also nobody at this stage realised that everybody would be able to see these. And so they've got things like, I don't like question mark, you know, put probably or something rather than question mark. I don't feel that these have been described well enough. Spool mouldings flanking a central rib. Well, if you know what a spool moulding is, then maybe, but could we have something that was less jargony? And I don't think they've mentioned the fact that there are these other elements there. So we do say to people that when they first start, they can just make a basic record, and particularly for coins, and then send it off to somebody else, the coin advisor, and they'll finish it. But I don't think that's relevant for you. More relevant is what we should put in the description field. So it's got these three elements: identification, what is it, what does it look like, description, and why is it interesting. And this is when handout 6 comes in. What I've tried to do with handout 6 is put all the relevant aspects that you could record about an object, and then try to string them together to make some kind of sense. It's not a real object described in handout 6, but I've colour-coded it so you can see which bit of information is where. So it might help to, if you're having trouble, to go through and see and just check off that you've put in the sides and the reverse and the surface coating and the whatever, you know. Now, these three parts, the identification is really helpful to put in right at the start, because of the way that the search results are organised, we've got something like 6 or 7 lines to begin with, and a lot of people decide whether they're going to open up a record on the basis of these 6 or 7 lines. So start off with what it is. I know it's got the object type there, but even so, repeat it with what it is, what material it is, what date it is, the classification, that kind of thing. So that's the identification done, and you can just state that. You'll back it up later. So that's really the easy bit. Then you have to start destroying it. We do the kind of outline shape first, and then fill in all the details in a logical order. So outside to inside, top to bottom, left to right, whatever the logical order is. Noting all the separate components, if there are any, what shape they are, what material they are, how they're decorated. If it gets a bit long, divide it up into paragraphs. Find a good place like front, reverse, or plate and frame of a buckle, that kind of thing. Now, as our principle is to write down what we see, you shouldn't put in too much interpretation before you have finished a proper description. So, if you've got a bit of extra copper alloy wrapped around the bar of a buckle, and you say that it's the remains of the pin loop, you're not putting in as much information as you could. What you really ought to do is to say what you see. What you see is a flat strip of copper alloy 6 millimetres wide, and it's wrapped around the bar. It may be the remains of the pin loop, but it may also be the remains of the hinge of a plate. You're allowing the reader to judge for themselves. I will tell you about this in more detail then, but about it's an incredibly early record of either a saucer brooch or a button brooch, and somebody wrote a little sentence about it saying a button brooch is a smaller variant of a saucer brooch, and almost every single one was talking that. So now you can't tell how many saucer brooches there are because every button brooch has the word saucer in it, and every saucer brooch has the word button in it. So I wanted to do the most frequently found brooches for you. I didn't want to spend ages doing brooches that there weren't very many of. So I did a count. I could count all the cruciforms, and I could count all the supporting arms, and I could count all the equal arms, but I couldn't count the buttons, and I couldn't count the saucers, just because this wretched sentence had been reproduced every single time, hundreds of them.
Oh, no.
And so that's really scarred me. So I'm worried about that now. But as long as it's got no really important little words, jargony words for searching in it, then that's fine. But yes, do check it for jargon. Alright, so you've described everything you can see now. You've described shape, construction, decoration. You've done the front, you've done the reverse, you've done the shape and cross section, so whether it's flat or three-dimensional or solid or hollow. You've checked if you're copying another record that you've left out everything that you can't see, or you've noted down that you can't see it on the image. Then you need to add all the other details so the description can be understood on its own, just in case we do lose all the other boxes. Put classification, date, material, measurements, put those into the description box too. Now there's many reasons for that. Minimising the chance that the data will be lost is one. Some people forget to enter the data in other fields, and making sure you put it in the description field is a bit of a reminder. And then, sorry about all this text, but sometimes you need to write more, and we've been through measurements earlier on, so you don't just write 42.4 millimetres. You can tell the reader other things. Then sometimes you need an argument to back up a date. You don't just want to put a bold date. Completeness. Is the grape fresh or worn? That's one of the things that people miss out an awful lot, and it's really useful to know. Sometimes people just put copper alloy and iron buckle, and you're left thinking, which bits are iron? I can't see it on the picture. Tell us which bits. Make sure you've told us everything. So don't assume that because another field's been filled in, the data doesn't need to go into the description field. It does. Spelling mistakes and typos. Please read your description over just quickly to see if you've missed a typo.
Farting.
Sorry, farting. Yes, you've done farting. Absolutely. A lot of people have a problem with apostrophes and inverted commas. I put all this on your handout so you don't have to remember. But this is one of the best tips I ever got. This never use it apostrophe S. If you can use it is, use it is. And if you can't, it doesn't have an apostrophe. I had that tip about 15 years ago, and it's been so useful. Yes, don't put inverted commas around words that you feel a bit insecure about. Just try to avoid using every time you reach for that inverted comma. Think, do I really need this? Sometimes you will, but not always. Also, try not to use too many abbreviations. They're hard to read. Use proper words. Yes, I've forgotten, I wrote this. Probably, perhaps, or possibly. They're all better than a question mark, because probably and possibly, you know the difference between those two. Perhaps is very much kind of 50-50. And don't try to draw things on the keyboard. Yes, because you can't search for it. And GM has crept in from coins. I don't know why. It's G for grams, not GM or GM. Yeah. So unnecessary words. Oval and triangular are sufficient. I don't know whether anybody has ever used subovular shaped in plan, but it's that kind of thing. When I used to survey earthworks, we used to think everything could be described as subrectaloid.
That sounds very rude.
Yes, it's horrible. I will share it with you. Now you can either write your descriptions straight on, or you can put them in Word first, which a lot of people do because they like the word processing tools. But you do have a limited range of word processing tools on the database. They work better in some browsers than others. I use italics quite a lot for things like a translation or a heraldic description. And bold works for subheadings when you occasionally need them. But have a fiddle about. The discussion is less important than the description, because why it's interesting, researching the object and giving parallels and so on, can always be done at a later date. But generally, the reader does need a little bit of help to convince them that you're right. So this is a lot of the showing your working comes in here. So you're trying to give enough evidence to convince our dreadful old cynic of a reader. And as I said before, an overconfident identification actually risks looking a bit naive. And even if the reader does believe you, you still need a bit of supporting evidence just so that we've got a full record. Now this is an example of a record we might not believe. It's an interesting object, but they're pretty rare, saddle pommels. Most people don't know anything about them. How does this person know it's a saddle pommel? How do they know it's that date? Why should we believe them? So that's one saddle pommel record. Here's another one. This is a very old one, in the days before cameras. Not quite, but it's certainly in the days before digital cameras. Now this has got some potential for misunderstanding. It's got the term slipper-shaped, which I don't like, as you all know. But the recorder has explained how they've come to this identification. They've obviously seen another one because they've cited it, and they've come to a judgment based on evidence. Now they've cited that parallel, and as you know, it's tremendously useful to cite parallels, but not all parallels are as good as each other. And I don't need to convince you of this, I'm sure, but archaeological finds from dated contexts are best, find spot and date, and also some evidence of the kind of person using them a lot of the time, urban, rural, etc., etc. Unstratified finds and PAS finds second best. They've got find spots, they haven't got independent dates. But the kind of thing that you find in books of photographs of finds with no dates and no find spots and no evidence. Let's have a look at this one again, because this is an interesting object. I think it's a 7th century felt plate. And I think that you might be tempted to look at the way in which it seems to have been altered. This is angled, these are curved, but it's been altered, and that one has always been curved. The lines cross slightly here. There's a lot of detail here, and I think because this is an interesting object, so I think this cross is significant. I think it's something to do with, Christianity is new in the 7th century. I think they might be referencing that. This is similar things. I've got a little nick out here to fit a buckle pin into, and I think it is very interesting. Then, and I think it would be worth putting all that detail into. And then what happens if the next thing that comes out of the bag is that? And you think, oh, life is too short to go into every single teeny detail of a mass-produced fingering. And you would be right if you thought that. Life is too short. You've got to record at a level appropriate to the importance of the object. And that's where looking at other database descriptions really helps, to decide on what's appropriate. So you can copy the style of a record that you think looks about right. So we're not so interested in what the craftsman was trying to do here. Another borderline area, should you mention colour? I don't know if you can even see the colour of that. But whoever can see my screen can see that that's a lovely rich reddy brown. And often late Anglo-Saxon objects corrode to that colour. I don't know if it's perhaps something to do with being more brass and bronze. So can 16th century, so can 19th century objects. In some cases, it will be relevant to your argument for date. You'll say, I think this is late Anglo-Saxon, I think this is Anglo-Scandinavian. Partly because it has that colour. If it's relevant, push it in. But don't feel you've got to try to describe the colour just because you usually describe the colour, or because you describe the colour of the previous one you did. You know, you don't have to do it just to be consistent. Right, and I think that's the end.